When you've been on the road as long as Jerry Dixie has, you end up with some wild stories to tell.
I mean, you're going up and down mountains. And I looked over and I realized I was a passenger in a hot rod driven by a former sprint car champ that makes throttle cables for a living. Okay. And I was terrified. I'm just like down below the cowl.
Welcome to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast telling the stories behind the cars and the people who build and drive them. I'm Joe McCullough, and in this episode we welcome Jerry Dixie. After Woodstock, Evel Knievel's Snake River attempt, and 110 consecutive NSRA Road Tour stops, Jerry has a lifetime of stories. His contributions in custom motorcycles and vans in the 60s and 70s, automotive memorabilia, and the road tour he's so famous for today have influenced generations of automotive fans. I want to start at the very, very beginning. What made you first fall in love with cars?
You know, it's funny that you would ask that today because I started a road or a Facebook page for the Road Tourians, and it's called Jerry Dixie's Road Tourians. And I did a Happy Father's Day post about my dad. And, you know, I'm sure people that are listening and you're wagging your head, I'm sure dad was a car guy or not. But that so many times is what brings us as youth around to the hobby. Yeah, we could read Hot Rod Magazine and that sort of thing. But when you got a guy in your life that can tear down a motor and put it back together, number one, you feel inadequate for your entire life because I'm not a good mechanic. but number two, that really gives you a base. And what I posted at the Facebook page yesterday was the story of my father in 1961 restoring my great grandfather's 1926 Model T Ford Woody station wagon. And it had been in the family. My great grandfather had a farm and he worked the farm with this Woody station wagon. And my dad got it in 1960, 1961, and he decided to restore it. And the backstory is that my great grandfather, who I very, very faint memory of that long ago, but he had painted it with yellow enamel paint. He painted all the wood with yellow enamel paint. And you go, oh, wow, that's kind of kooky, right? Yellow enamel paint on a wood body car. But in retrospect, it was not that he thought of this, but it was genius because it preserved all the wood. And the car, the station wagon, which I still own, has all the original wood from 1926.
Wow.
And it's because of that yellow enamel paint. And one of my first memories of working with my dad restoring the car, you know, how much can you help when you're 9 years old? But was being out in the garage at our house, you know, 9 years old, living at home, obviously. And we use zip strip. Are you familiar with zip strip, Joe?
Oh, yeah.
Has it been outlawed completely on all faces of the earth everywhere? It is the most toxic chemical I have ever encountered. Is it? At least I'll have it.
I
don't
have
know.
a feeling they've probably changed the formula to now it's the PG rated version.
Well, what we did was we were stripping the yellow enamel paint off the wood body. And hey, I'm helping my dad. You know, I'm cool. I got a white T-shirt on. I'm 9 years old. And he goes, well, you know, we'll brush it on, and then we'll take this wire brush and we'll remove it. I'm okay. Well, he's not watching me, and I'm using this wire brush, and it's spraying the zip strip onto my arms. But who's going to say, Dad, this hurts? No, man, I was glad to be with Dad working on this Woody wagon, right? So he finally looked over. He goes, don't your arms hurt? I go, uh-huh. And he grabbed me by the collar and he threw me in the kitchen and said, Barb, clean him up and put him in a long sleeve work shirt, you know, and goodness. So I was back. But at any rate, we restored that car. He restored the car. And how much can I help at 9 years old? But he formed, along with 9 other fellows in Northeastern Ohio, the Model T Ford Club of Mahoning County, of our area. So I grew up in the Model T Ford and going to car shows and going to events that the Ford, you know, there was a lot of Model T clubs and Model A clubs back in the day. This is, of course, the 60s. And there was a ton of those clubs. So we would go to the events and I would chug along and mom and dad would be in the front seat and there'd be a covered casserole in the front, you know, and we're going to a picnic and all that sort of thing. So I grew up around that. Dad was very helpful and supportive of what I did. And I'll tell you one more story of the Model T Ford. When I was a junior in high school, the prettiest girl in school came to me and she said, Jerry, your dad has that old car, doesn't he? It's in all the parades we see in Canfield. I go, yep, he does. And she said, would you drive me and the homecoming queen court down the football field this Friday at the ceremonies before the football game? And I went, oh boy. Now, Joe, have you ever driven a Model T Ford?
I have.
Oh, God bless you, because they are the hardest thing to get used to. As anything else, you get used to it, right? But it was straight out of a Frank Capra movie. It's Friday night, our little town of 5,000 people. Every single person was on the bleachers, right? And I've got all the pretty girls in school in my car, and I'm at one end of the field, of the football field. And as you know, you get going, and when you reach that certain RPM, then you lift up on your left, and it goes from low to high. And I hit that 50-yard line, and I thought I was there. I held my breath, and I lifted up, and it moved right into high, and I made it to the goalpost. You would have thought I scored the winning touchdown at the state championships. I was so excited, and it's something that, hey, Dad was the driver, I was the passenger when I was growing up. But I have been asked to bring that car up to Detroit during the Woodward Dream Cruise. It's almost identical to the cars that they have at the Greenfield Village. Have you had the pleasure of going to Greenfield Village in Henryport? Yep. It's just like those Woodies that go around. And we're sponsored by Motor City Solutions up in Detroit for our Woodward Dream Cruise tour. And he heard that I had this car, and he said, Jerry, I want you to bring it up for an open house, and then we're going to have it on display during the Dream Cruise. And I said, Jeff, it's a Model T. I can't drive it. I'm in Ohio. I'm 3 hours away. And he goes, Jerry, I've got car haulers. Just tell me, how much roof clearance do we need? And I said, well, okay, we can do that. And then I thought, I better relearn how to drive it, because he's going to want me to be giving rides in his parking lot. So me and my wife, Marianne, and my sidekick, Pete, and my brother too, because my brother spent a lot of time in the car. We all went out to the local county fairgrounds where there's a lot of room and not a lot of buildings and other cars. And it's like a bicycle. You remember the sounds, and as you know, and maybe some of your listeners that have had the pleasure of driving a Model T, the accelerator's on the steering wheel. And then it goes brake, reverse, low, neutral, high, going right to left on the three pedals on the floor, and the spark advance on the left. And all that's fine and dandy when you're going, oh, okay, well, that's that, and that's that, until you get into a crisis situation where you have to act fast. And the first thing you do is lift your foot off the floor. Well, no, that's not your accelerator. Your accelerator. Right. At any rate, that was my first old car interaction. In the 60s, we raced slot cars, and I was the afternoon manager at a slot car track in my town when I was in high school, a dream job. And then I started working on motorcycles, and ruined a whole bunch of motorcycles. Us chopper builders cut them up in the 60s and 70s. Is we put the fire wrench to the neck and raked them out and took the suspension. Well, you've seen them. But anyway, I did motorcycles for about 5 years. Built custom bikes the whole time I was going to college, and then I went into from motorcycles. I went into custom vans. And I had a van shop for 25 years. I operated a van shop. The scene in the mid 70s, that was just a hot thing, those custom vans. So that was the big thing, and that cooled down a little bit. And we did family conversions with 4 seats and a sofa and a bay window. And then I might as well finish this whole story, right, about how did we get to here. But I had the custom van shop, and I always was enamored with collectibles, with gas station stuff and pedal cars. And I built models. My first model I built was Ed Roth's Outlaw. And whenever when I see the Outlaw, and I think Speedway has the original or one of the good.
The one in the museum is a clone, but I believe it was pulled from the original mold, as I understand it.
There, yeah, I know Dave Shooten has that. Dave Shooten has that
Hmm.
old. I still get chills as an adult when I see the Outlaw. To me, and it's hard to pull your memory out and go, do you realize how far out that car was in the mid 60s? Between the Outlaw and the Beatnik Bandit, it's like, wow. And I've met it. Did you ever have the pleasure of meeting Ed Roth?
I did not.
Interesting guy. He dealt in a different plane, and people would joke and say, boy, he's really strange, but he was pretty down to earth. But he had such a creative bent. He like so many artists, he saw things in a different way.
Hmm.
And when you look at the Beatnik Bandit and the Outlaw, and you go, they were putting Packard taillights on the backs of 57 Chevys, and he's building this stuff.
Right.
And so anyway, I did that. So we did stock cars, did the motorcycles, and then we built the custom vans, and I had the collectibles. Well, I took a part of my van shop and the waiting room I filled with neon clocks and signs and reproduction stuff and pedal cars. And everybody would go in there and say, hey, where'd you get this stuff? I want to do my kitchen like this. I want to do my basement. And by the way, they need to outlaw the word man cave. I hate it. It is silly. Whoever came up with it, you're fired. But they would say, I want to buy this stuff. So I thought, well, maybe there's a market for this. So I started a company called Classic. At the time, I called it Classic Transportation, but I kept getting calls from people that wanted their classic cars shipped to California, and I meant transportation like motorcycles, hot rods, and that kind of thing. So I changed it to Classic Automobilia, and we had a catalog. We shipped products all over the world. That is how, we'll bring it kind of a circle to Speedway, how I met Speedy Bill. I was invited by a fellow from SEMA, Dick Wells, to bring my stuff out to SEMA because they were doing a display. This goes back quite a while. This probably would have been 86, 7, 8, 89, doesn't matter. And they were doing a display, and they wanted to have an area of like collectibles. It was when collectibles were first getting hot. And they wanted to have some gas pumps and pedal cars and neon clocks. And Dick Wells had seen my catalog, and he invited me to bring my stuff out. And it was just amazing. I took a couple of my pedal car. We had a custom fiberglass pedal car, and we had custom gas tanks and things. And he had invited Bill. And in that weekend, I met half of my heroes on a first name basis. Bill was there with Beverly Hills Motor Cars company with the pedal cars of his. Chico from Moon Eyes was there with their stuff, and on and on and on. The people that I met that had things in that display that were just people that I had just read about. So it was a very significant an event for me to meet all those, and Bill and I, and until Bill passed, I'm proud to say that Bill I considered a good friend of mine, and we shared the same hobbies, and I would always during the road tour go when I'm traveling west on I-80, I would jump off on Lincoln every time, and I'd walk up and the secretary knew me. And she said, Bill's back in the office. And he'd go, Dixie, where are you going? What are you doing? And the time that was the most significant for me was the day that he said, you got a few minutes? And I said, I always have. Whatever time you want, Bill. Says, come on, I'm going to show you the new museum. And it wasn't open yet.
Oh, wow.
And he unlocked the door. And the handrails were still, he goes, don't touch your handrails. You just paint them. They were still wet with paint. I had a Sony camera that could take videos, old guy, could do digital film. And I said, Bill, is it okay if I photograph while you're talking? And I, over his shoulder, walked behind him, and he walked me through the museum. At that time, I think it was just 2 floors.
Right.
I walked with Bill, and it was just amazing. I had been to the old, were you ever at the other museum, on Speedway Drive, the first one?
No.
And it was unbelievable in its own right. But to me, and again, I got chills right now talking about it. To me, the Speedway Motors Museum is, for a car guy, it is the end of the rainbow. It is just amazing, the things that they have. And I'll give a shout out to my buddy Tim at the museum. Tim Matthews does a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm.
And they've always, from Bill, when Bill was still with us, to Clay and Tim, they've always been so receptive to me bringing some people to the museum and seeing it. So anyway, I started the classic automobilia, and I I was set up uh, at the Lead Sled Nationals in outside of Cincinnati, and I had my pedal car display and my classic automobilia display. And Tom Vogley walked in with Jerry Wiesner. Now, for those that are listening that don't know who Tom is, Tom was the editor of Street Rodder magazine for many years. He then went on to be and is currently the editor of Street Scene for NSRA. Well, I recognized Tom from his pictures in the magazine. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing? Boy, this stuff looks pretty cool." And I said, "Hi, Tom. I'm Jerry Dixie, and I would I think maybe you should think about doing an article about pedal cars because a lot of the hot rod guys are customizing their pedal cars." And he gave me the answer that I figured out later on that it was his standard response to, "Hey," and all due respect to Studebaker pickup trucks, but, "Hey, you ought to do an article on Studebaker pickup trucks." And he would go, "Well, if you know about Studebaker pickup trucks, why don't you write the article?" Well, he made the mistake of, he said to me, "If you know about pedal cars, why don't you write the article?" And I said, "How many words and what kind of photography do you need?" And he goes, "Oh, well, okay." And I should know this for sure. The March of 1992, I think, March, it is the pedal car issue. And I had 6 articles about pedal cars in one issue of Street
Wow.
Rodder magazine. And it just blew up. We were selling things. And so I got to be good friends with Tom and Tim
Mhm.
Foss. Tim was the salesman
Mhm.
at the time,
Mhm.
Tim. And we just ran with it. We became good friends. They liked the way I rode. It was kind of Cracker Barrel. Oh, golly shucks, let's do this. And I'm writing these things about pedal cars, and I wrote about gas pumps and collectibles and gas station things. And they liked the way I wrote. And then I built, through the help of my how do they say it? A brother from a different mother, Barry Lobeck. Did you know
Mhm.
Barry, Joe? Did you know?
I never met, I'm very familiar with his cars, but I never met him.
Most of the things you heard was true.
Mhm.
Barry was a fun guy and a crazy guy, and we hit it off. We were both about the same age, both from Ohio, and his crew took a 34 Ford 4-door sedan that I had bought that was an antique, and I said, well, I said maybe we could make it a hot rod, and I said, but it wouldn't be a Pro Street rod, and it wouldn't be a Resto rod. Let's call it the Presto rod,
Mhm.
and show folks how you can take an antique car and make it into a fun, safe, reliable hot rod and not do a lot of changes to it. That was the time, the transition time, when there was a lot of the older fellows like my dad that were starting to pass away, and these antiques were sitting there. And, instead of taking the whole thing off and doing a whole frame build, frame and body and all that, just make them safe, make
Mhm.
sure that you got the go and you got the whoa, and that you're not afraid to drive them and that sort of thing. So we did the Presto rod, and I wrote a 4-part buildup of it in Street Rodder, and it was featured in 1990, 93, 94. And I started driving, and I loved it. I just had
Mhm.
so much fun driving street rods. So I went to Tom and I said, I got an idea. I said, why don't we build a street rod, and we'll get the advertisers to donate some parts and put it together, and we'll cover the buildup of it. Maybe Barry could do it or somebody could do it, and then drive it to all the events around the country, all the NSRA events, and show people that if you use good products from our advertisers, obviously,
Mhm.
and you use common sense and use some good safety standards when you're building it, these things should be driven. This was the day of the trailer queens, and that's another term I don't particularly care for, but that was the days when the guys that were getting into our hobby were coming from different walks of life. They weren't the teenage guys that built their hot rods.
Mhm.
They were a businessman that built up a bank account, and they wanted to get involved. And I have no problem with that at all. If somebody has been successful in something else and they want to play with what I like to play with, that's fine. They can buy a bat and ball, and that's okay. So I've got no problem with folks buying a street ride. But the downside of it is if you didn't build it and you're not familiar with it, you're kind of a little bit afraid to drive it. So that's why guys were loading their cars up and putting them in trailers and dragging them to the fairgrounds and getting them off and rumping around the fairgrounds. So I said, this could show people that you can drive these things. And Tom said, man, I love it. And I said, okay, well, we'll build the whole car. And at the end of the season, we'll sell it. And that's how I can get compensated for part of my time. It's going to take some time, and we can pay for the space at the events. And he said, no, if we get the parts from the advertisers, we can't sell it. We need to give it away. And I said, okay, but I'm not the Mother Teresa of driving street rods here. I can't give it away. I need to make up a little bit. How am I going to explain to my wife what I did for 3 months this summer? And she was running our van shop. So he goes, oh, we'll pay you. And I stopped and went, you'll pay me to drive your hot rod around the United States? He goes, yeah. He goes, come up with a number, come up with an amount. He goes, I don't want to get receipts from donuts and gasoline and oil and all. And he goes, figure out how much it's going to cost us in the hotel rooms and all that stuff. So okay. I did some ciphering, as they say, and I tried to kind of figure out, well, I'm going to be on the road, and these motors get maybe 18 miles to the gallon on the motor. And so I came up with a number, and I've told this story a number of times, and my wonderful wife, but Marianne and I have been together 50 years.
Wow.
And she's got more brains than I do, I think, when it comes to common sense stuff. And I came up with a number that I was comfortable with. And she said, well, you need to add 10, 15, 20% onto that. And I go, why? And she said, well, you're forgetting something. And I said, well, what am I forgetting? And she goes, we don't know what you're forgetting, right? But you're forgetting something. And while you're out being a hot rod hero, I'm going to be running our van shop. So you need to at least make it worth your while. So I did that. I showed Tom the number, and I was a little bit nervous, but you got to understand, they're out in LA and I'm in Youngstown, Ohio. And I pushed a number just like in the movies across the desk. And I said, here. And he goes, oh, okay, well, we should probably get T-shirts made and some other things. I go, well, we're not even going to negotiate this. He goes, no, that's fine. I go, I didn't ask for enough, did I? He goes, probably not, but we'll eventually give you a raise. And the rest is history. I drove to 110 consecutive NSRA events around the United States over a 10-year period in a hot rod.
Wow.
And, I'm not saying, hey, look at me. I had the help of a lot of people, and a lot of people stayed back in the home front and did a lot of things, my wife and the people out at Street Rodder magazine. But yeah, I was out there, and I hit the pavement and traveled 25,000 miles a year for 10 consecutive years. And that's a lot of NSRA events. And I made some great friends, Wings Callahan, Buck Reynolds, the whole Vernon Walker, the whole NSRA team, and the other folks. Those were the days when there was a lot of companies that were putting big rigs. Speedway was doing it, had big rigs and trailers out that did every single event. And we were, this sounds crazy, but we were rock stars. I mean, we would hit town, and all of us that were travelers, we wouldn't travel together, but we would hit town on Thursday, and we all stayed at the headquarters hotel. And we just had a great time of being the show. We were the show. We were like a baseball team or a rock band or whatever, and had a good time. And then come Sunday afternoon when they shut down, we'd head our separate ways and say, see you in 2 weeks in Bakersfield or wherever we were going. So that was the first 10 years of the road tour. And after that period of time, Tim and I, of course, we became good friends, and Tom Vogley was still there at that time. He said, we need to mix things up a little bit. I go, okay, well, what do you got in mind? And he said, why don't you write a column and invite people to travel with you in their cars? And I went, well, that'll change everything. It's just, I was used to what my usual day involved when I was traveling to an event is I would get up at the crack of dawn. If it was going to be a long day, I would get up an hour. And this is kind of insightful for those of you that want to do some miles. I would get up, if it was going to be a long day, an hour before sunrise. And I would drive, as I like to say, take my darkness in the morning. I would take my darkness for the first hour and a half or 2 hours because I knew the sun was coming up. If you drive into the night after the sun goes down, you're not getting any light until 8 hours when that sun comes up. So I thought, I'd rather take I don't like to drive at night anyway. But anyway, I would drive 750 to 800 miles a day. And when the sun went down, I would stop. And that was my normal routine. I didn't have to make hotel reservations. I would go to the first, Super 8 motel or whatever and stay there.
Jerry's first articles in Street Rodder made a splash, but the working relationships they established planted the seeds for something much greater. At the time, a lot of people trailered their cars around to events. Jerry wanted to prove that you could make an old street rod reliable. This is where the storied Road Tour begins, and it all started with a build called the Presto Rod. I want to make a personal comment here. I was in college and learning what hot rods were about. I grew up with cars like you, Dad, who did car stuff, but hot rods and street rods were sort of foreign to me. That wasn't part of my orbit. So I read Street Rodder magazine while I was at work at my, crappy video store. I would sit there and read Street Rodder magazine. And I remember reading your Road Tour articles, and I remember reading that you like to start before the sun came up, and then you'd have sort of be reinvigorated when the sun would come up. And I remember thinking, like, man, what a cool situation to be in, to be out on the road in a hot rod, and man, I hope I can get there someday. And lo and behold, years and years and years later, I was able to join you on the tour, with Speedway Motors and sort of did that. And it was this really great sort of full circle moment for me to actually be able to, get up early in the morning and hit the road with a coffee in my hand and an old hot rod. And I think back often to, reading those columns when I was young and had no idea that I would ever actually get to do it.
Well, that's very fulfilling for me. And I'll tell you why. What you just said is when I started doing the road tours, I wasn't doing it necessarily for the money. I thought, what, how cool is this, what they're going to let me do? And I looked back to when I was a kid and I picked up Hot Rod magazine, and they always had coverage of Bonneville. And I saw those guys sleeping on the salt or sleeping in the barracks at the Air Force Base, the 49ers, the Bob Pearsons, right? The Pearson brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, if someday some young kid could look at my articles, and true story, I could look at my articles and go, how cool to be that time when that was going on. So I guess it's happened. I'm done. I'm retiring right now officially. But no, seriously, that's a fantastic story. And thank you for sharing that, because that really is what I had in mind. I thought, how cool would it be for someday to have a young person go, wow, that was really neat what they were doing back then. Because a lot of people travel with me too.
So I want to go back actually to the very first road tour, the blue 33, 34 coupe, whatever it was, with the white stripes over the top. It's a very famous car now. You had this brilliant idea that you were going to do this. It actually came to fruition. You get in the car, you turn the key, it's early in the morning, and you're about ready to head out on the road on the very first leg of this. What was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, interesting, because the very first leg where I was the driver by myself, those of you that have been around a long time with NSRA and going to rod runs, Knoxville used to be the kickoff. It was the beginning of May. And then the next one was out in Bakersfield, California. So Tom Vogley came in, and Tom and I took that car down, and Barry was following with the trailer because we weren't quite sure. Lobeck's built that car, by the way, and Debbie Walls from Low Car owns it now. And Tom and I took the car down there, and we had a big entourage. So there was no scary stuff involved there. But the next trip was me getting in it at Barry Lobeck's, and as you said, turning the key and driving to, the destination was Bakersfield, California, but I drove down to Nashville from there, and I'd never really spent a ton of time in a street rod. but as I recall, I wasn't nervous. I had, I had faith in Lobeck's crew, the guys that built the car. A number of them are still in business at Precision Hot Rods in Macedonia. But I went down to Nashville and I picked up Skip Wall from Low Car, Skip. And we drove, the first day we drove from Nashville to San Antonio. And the next day, and Skip hates it when I tell this story. He hates it. If he listens to this, he's going to go, oh, don't tell that. But we drove to San Antonio, stayed overnight, got up the next morning, and I drove all day long. And Skip, yeah, you did, slept all day long. And I was driving. Well, the sun's going down. I don't like to drive at night. And we got to not Winslow, just past Winslow, top of the hill, where we at in Arizona, on Interstate 44. And I'm pulling off, and he wakes up and he goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "We're getting a hotel. I've driven all day." He goes, "Move over." He says, "I'm driving. We got to get to LA. I got things to do." And I go, "Oh, geez, you're kidding me." He goes, "No, come on, I'm going to drive." Well, that stretch after you crest the mountain, after Winslow and the next town, it's a big town, I can't think of the name, but anyway, it's all white. I mean, you're going up and down mountains. And I looked over and I realized I was a passenger in a hot rod driven by a former sprint car champ that makes throttle cables for a living. Okay. And I was terrified. I'm just like down like that. You can't see it. Down below the cowl, and we made it he drove another 3 or 4 hours down, and we came out of the mountains, and then we stayed overnight and we took it in the next day. But that was my experience. But the first day by myself to get down to Nashville, yeah, it was a little bit intimidating. But as I look back on this stuff, and I've been posting a lot of pictures on my road tour Facebook page, Jerry Dixie's Road Tourians. I asked Marianne the other day, I go, how did I do all that? Because in retrospect, when you're in the middle of something, what do they say? When you're in the middle of draining the swamp, you don't think about the alligators. But when you're in the middle of something, you're not, it's just one step ahead of the next one, and do it and do it and do it. Got to get to here, got to get to here, got to get to here. But when you look back on it, you go, man, I was crazy or lucky or both. I don't know. It was a time.
So you talked about the road tour sort of evolving and then taking on a crew of people that traveled with you. Mm-hmm. What, I guess, either the first version or the latter version, what were some of the major sort of obstacles that you had to overcome to actually pull off the road tour every year?
With the group? With the group, it was much more work. When I was by myself, it was literally, I had to be at an event, at a location, at a city, whether it was Bakersfield or Knoxville or Kalamazoo. I had to be there by Thursday for setup day. For the first few years, I was in the building, which made it a little bit tougher. But after that, we got a tent and I stayed out in the outside exhibit area. But I had to be there. The only had to be was the fact that I couldn't call Vernon Walker and say, "Hey, buddy, could you delay this event for a couple of days? I'm having a little bit of trouble here." So that was something that I had to make sure got done. But I traveled as far as I wanted to go. If I wanted to travel a long day, then I wouldn't travel as much the next day. And it changed when I had people with me, because I had to get a little bit more realistic on traveling. Mm-hmm. And I had to plan places that we were going to stop. You were with us on a couple of the Speedway Motors tours. And we try to do activities, obviously. It's not just drive. So we would stop. And that was more work for me, more front end work. But it was more fun for me. Number one, I'm a people person. You saw that when you traveled with us. But number two, I got to see all those places. I used to tell people when I was traveling, and I did the articles about the trip, and then I did the event coverage every trip in Street Rodder. So it was the driving, and then a separate article was the event coverage. when you saw that those early cars sitting in front of a sign that said the National Corvette Museum, if you looked real close, you could probably see the exhaust coming out of the pipe because that car never shut off.
Yeah.
I never went in. I never said I went in. I just said we stopped at,
Yeah.
stopped at this sign. So I then with groups, I got to enjoy it more. I got to do some things. There's a whole different aspect of it, a whole different element, making sure that everybody was comfortable and happy. And I did a pretty decent job of making sure everybody was okay with it. The way I looked at it was if they didn't like the format, they didn't like the way we did it, they wouldn't come back next time. But at the end, towards the final years, we had what I calculated as 75% repeat people. And when they're doing that, that's the biggest compliment you can have, is to have repeat people.
In just a minute, we asked Jerry about his favorite experience from all the years on the road tour, and he tells us an almost unbelievable story about a chance encounter with a famous figure from early hot rodding. But first, to see pictures of Jerry and his adventures out on the road, visit the Toolbox, our automotive blog. Find it at speedwaymotors.com by clicking the Toolbox link on the front page. We'll also post a few shots to Facebook and Instagram. New episodes of What Moves You come out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you like what you hear, tell a friend to listen to What Moves You on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Looking back on all of the years that you did the tour in any format, is there one memory that stands out as your favorite moment?
Yeah, I've talked about this a couple of times, and I've written about it. And again, I hate to keep referring back to the Tourian page, but that Facebook group has given me a chance to relive all this stuff with all my pictures. There were a couple of times. I was out at the Bonneville Salt Flats in 1997 in the McMullen Roadster clone. You're familiar with the car, I'm sure. Maybe some of the listeners. And I'm at the end of the asphalt before it turns to salt. And they had shut the course down because it had rained the day before. And for those of you that have been out there, you'll understand once it rains, it's over for a couple of days. It really makes a mess out of it. And I'm sitting there, and this guy comes up, and he's older than me, and he goes, "Is this Tom's car?" I go, "No, it's a replica of Tom's car." He goes, "Oh yeah, I knew Tom. I used to hang around together and run together and stuff." I go, "Hi, I'm Jerry Dixie," and he goes, "Hi, I'm Bob Pearson. Could I drive the car?"
Oh man.
Yeah, I know. That's what I did. And I knew who he was after he said it. And I go, yep, you could drive it. And he got behind the wheel, and I don't know if maybe I'm just skittish when other people are driving. But if you've been to Bonneville, you know that the asphalt, after you come off the salt, it's asphalt, and then it's a hard left to get to the freeway. He came blasting down the road, and he goes, "It's running pretty good, isn't it?" I go, "Yeah, you're scaring the heck out of me." It was that was a stud car, if I can use that term. That was a 30, for those that aren't aware, it was a black 32 Ford Highboy Roadster with a small block blown Chevy that had 450 horsepower, no springs in the seats, and it just took off. I mean, it ran like a bat. It had flames on it and a moon tank, and it looked like I was having fun no matter what I was doing. That was a good car. Anyway, Bob Pearson said to me, he said, "You got a couple minutes?" He goes, "I'd like to chat with you." And I'm thinking, well, yeah, sure, that's fine. And we went over, and he was in his motorhome with his wife, and he said, "Sandy, let's get some coffee." And I was just speechless because I knew who it was. It was like one of those scenes where, I guess, Field of Dreams, where the baseball players walk out of the cornfield, and you walk up and you go, "Oh my gosh, we've kind of interacted here." And he sat down, and he started talking and telling me stories. And he had pictures of about going there in 1949 as part of the 49ers. He goes, "We stayed at that Air Force." It was Wendover Air Force Base. And he said, "We stayed at that Air Force Base up there." He said, "They charged us 50 cents a night for a bunk. And we stayed there, and we raced. And then we went back and told the world, what we had done, Bobby Meeks and Pearson and his brother. It was Bob and his brother, Dick Pearson, were the Pearson brothers. And I've got a great picture of Bob and I standing next to the salt, leaning against the car, and that's just one of my moments. That was a big moment. I've had some great moments we just relived through pictures for the Memorial Day. We've visited a number of Air Force bases, and it's just great to meet the troops that have served our country and let them see our stuff. And we went to Air Station Oceana in Norfolk, Virginia, and I had made contact with the city manager of Virginia Beach. They wanted to have a car show, so he said, "Well, I'd like to meet you and talk about how you put a car show on." And I go, "Okay, fine. I'm going to bring our group in." And he said, "I said, do you think we could get into the airbase?" And he goes, "Well, let me make a call. I think so. Or I'll put you in touch with the commander. I guess that's the name. It was Naval Air Station." And so they met us. The city manager met us. He got in the car with me. The commander, and I apologize to you veterans because I'm probably saying the wrong word, but the guy in charge of the place, he met us too. They actually mirrored our cars, meaning they inspected our cars. They looked underneath. They looked in the trunks. This goes back quite a ways. This was 2000. This was before. No, I take that back. It was 2008, 2009. And they mirrored our cars. They checked our trunks, and they let us roll in. And the commander said, "You follow me. Get behind me." He goes, "I'm going to direct your people. I'm going to go 10, 10, 10 to go in these different hangars that had the Tomcats and the Hornets fighter planes in them."
Oh yeah.
Right? So we're going down behind these buildings, and the commander's going, "Come this way," and we're following. And they brought us out onto the flight line with our cars. And we got partway down, and the city manager looked at me and he goes, "Who are you?" And I said, "What?" And he goes, "I've been the city manager of Virginia Beach for 10 years. I've never gotten past the back of the buildings, and you're driving down the flight line." So I go, guy from Ohio, I don't know. I called and said, "We're bringing some hot rods." So we set up in those hangars. And those fly guys, talk about some tough. I mean, they were pilots. It was Top Gun guys. This was who this was. This was the Tomcats and the Hornets. And we opened the cars up and opened the hoods, and they came out and they looked and they were in all of our equipment, and I'm just looking at these Tomcats going, wow. And they were doing touch and goes out in the flight line. They were coming down and going right back up, and that stopped for lunch break, I guess. And the fellow in charge, the commander, said, "Well, you want to get some pictures out by the planes?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." And so we took our cars and we parked them in between the Tomcats that were staged out on the flight.
Oh, that's cool.
And took the picture. And to top things off, as if that wasn't amazing enough, to top things off, as we were getting ready to go, he said to me, the man in charge, he said, "Do you have another half an hour?" And I said, Sure. What's up?" He goes, "Well, our boys and women, men and women, we won a competition a couple of months ago out west. They have a competition among the bases, and we won. And the Rear Admiral of the Navy's coming right now to give them their award. And if you would stay, we'd like you to be part of the ceremony." And we're going, yeah. And we were in the back, and they had all the chairs, and some of the family members were there, and the pilots, the men and the women pilots, they're in their dress stuff, and they're all there. And this Rear Admiral of the Navy came up with his entourage, and it looked just like in the movies. And he comes up and he goes, "Welcome." He says, I want to say hello and congratulate you, men and women." He said, "Before we get started on the ceremony," he goes, "I want to thank you hot rodders for sticking around and being a part of this." I'm going, "Hey, at least we could do." So that was one of those moments that there were probably 20 cars with us. And to this day, when those 20 of us, when we cross paths, it's like, wow, that was a time. That was exciting.
So the 25th tour was going to be your last one, and you were going to kind of go out with a bang, and then it didn't happen. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like you sort of missed the opportunity to take your victory lap?
Yeah. I was excited about the 25th. I had helped put the 25th program together. And what I mean by that is, for those of you that may have seen it, the car that I was going to drive and the car that was actually finished for that tour was a 33 Ford Coupe that the car was sponsored by Locar. It was built by Precision Hot Rods in Macedonia. And two of the members of the Precision team, one is Danny Tizar is the owner, and Mark Mendoza is the painter. They were on the first car. They were on the build team of the first car. So and Locar was the sponsor. We painted it black with silver stripes instead of blue with white stripes, but it looked the same with a lot of modern. I mean, our hobby has changed, as you know, Joe. Our hobby has changed so much from 1996 to 2020, 21. Right. And so there was a lot of updates. Car was beautiful, made the cover of Hot Rod magazine. And I was proud of the fact that it was going to be a full circle moment. And Locar owns that car. They were the sponsor of the car. They own the car, and it is now the stablemate of the blue and white car. And so that part of it's good. Yeah, I didn't get the brass bands that I was hoping for on the 25th, but if I can tell this, I think it's okay. I am doing a couple more tours this year, and I'll probably do a couple more tours next year on my own. My wife and I, with Classic Automobilia. It's going to be the same type of a format. It's going to a little bit different. It's going to all inclusive and include everything that we're doing that week. Is going to be all in one money. But I'm doing Woodward, and then we're doing Nashville Shades of the Past. So I'm still out there. And now that I've gotten back in the public again, you know, we all had our heads down in the foxhole, as you did, I'm sure, for a year and a half. Now that I'm out again and doing it, I missed it. I really did. I didn't miss 8 tours. I was gone 90 days on the road from May till September.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why we're still married after 50 years. I don't know. There was a rumor in the industry that Marianne had personally financed the road tours in the early years just to get me out of the house all those days. No, we get along fine. She's a car gal. She likes to go with me on occasion. She's spent some road tours with me on the road. The people that are on the tour with me, when they see Marianne, they all smile and go, yes, Marianne's with him and he won't be as grumpy. She won't let him be mean to us. Not that I am, but I guess towards the end, the final years, I might have gotten a little grumpier.
Everyone considers the name Jerry Dixey to be synonymous with the road tour, but he's also huge in the automotive memorabilia scene with a significant pedal car and soapbox derby collection. So Classic Automobilia was kind of the thing that opened the door to the road tour. Everybody knows you for doing the road tour, but you have a pretty impressive collection of stuff. I mean, how did that start?
Well, you know, that was something that I've always been a pack rat. In fact, I realized how much of a pack rat I was all last summer during the pandemic when I went through I've got 2 pretty big buildings, 40 by 80 and a 50 by 25 on my property at home, plus a van shop that I still own the building.
Wow.
How did everybody let me collect all this stuff? I mean, I would go through, I had a great time, obviously a great time collecting it, but I had a great time going through it and finding things. And what I enjoyed was I would find photographs and paperwork and call people that I hadn't talked to in 15 years and call them. I called Chad Looney from Vintique, and I took a picture of the letter that he sent with his first donation of taillights for that first tour coupe. So I enjoyed all that, but I come from a collectible family. My brother collects political items. My grandma collected the classic stuff from back in the day, coins and stamps. That was the collectible stuff. But I kept all that stuff. And I thought about that when I was going through it. And I go, how was I able to accumulate it? And I think the reason I was able to accumulate it all is because in owning businesses, I've owned my own business since I was 19. In owning my businesses, I always had space to put stuff. Where if you didn't own a business and it was just your home, your basement would get filled up pretty quick, but it takes a while to get a 50 by 80 foot building filled.
Right.
And, so that's, that's fun. You're talking about collectibles. And again, that was another one of the things that Bill Smith and I, Speedy Bill, shared was the pedal cars and the soapbox derby stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great to see the collection of derby stuff. I've got, and I sound like a bragger here, I've got one of the largest private collections of soapbox derby items in the country. I've got a
Mm-hmm.
helmet from every year from 1934 when it was in Dayton, Ohio. It wasn't in Akron. It didn't move to
Mm-hmm.
Akron until 36. But I've collected that stuff. I go to Hershey. Back in our part of the country, in the Midwest, and in Nebraska too, the people didn't move a lot.
Yeah.
The family stayed on the homestead. Maybe they stayed on the farm back in Nebraska. They stayed in the houses. They worked in the mills in the 20s, and the generations didn't tend to move a lot. And when you get people that don't move a lot, the stuff just
Right.
accumulates. If you went to California, there was probably a whole lot of really cool stuff in the desert that got pitched by the time you got there.
What is the most meaningful piece to you in your collection?
Oh wow, that's good. I've got, as far as the soapbox derby stuff, um, they did a trophy in 37, 38, and 39. If you've ever seen the early logo of the soapbox derby, it's the Earth with a ring of Saturn around it, and old number 7, which was driven by Ed Turner in 1934, that won the first one. And this old number 7 is cresting this globe.
Mm-hmm.
And old number 7 is always broken off because it's just tacked. It's an old trophy, right? It's just tacked at the wheels. So it's always broken off. So I was able to find and acquire one of those. That was a significant piece. And this is kind of off the wall, but I have a 1963 Roth catalog from Maywood, California, addressed to Jerry Dixie,
Oh
220
man.
Canfield, Ohio. Now, can you imagine the postman? Now, everybody's listening to this knows who Ed Roth and some of his crazy wild T-shirts and
Yeah.
sweatshirts and things. But can you imagine the postman in my little town of Canfield, Ohio, with 5,000 people going, what? Because the mailman always looked at the mail, right? And they would open this and go, what is this Dixie kid look? And that's probably my prized possession. It's not the most valuable, but it's
Right.
probably one of my, because it goes back to my origins. Of course, my prized possession is my dad's Model T station wagon.
Mm-hmm.
But in my collectibles, yeah, that Roth catalog would be right up there.
What is it about the pedal cars and the derby cars? What is it about those that makes you, compulsively collect all of this stuff?
The pedal cars. Now, see, the derby cars. Let me do the pedal cars first. Those of us that grew up in the 50s, the guys had pedal cars. That was our not our mode of transportation, but that was our toy. That's what we would play with. And when I can remember the first pedal car I bought as a collectible, and it was at the Atlantic City Antique Show, and it was sitting there, and it didn't even have a drivetrain underneath it. But I looked at it, and for some reason, I just felt like I had to have that. I wanted it. And what it was, I don't know how well you know the pedal cars, but it was a 48 Pontiac.
Mm-hmm.
48 Pontiac pedal car was made by Murray from 1948 to about 1950. And it's got a distinctive nose on it. And I don't know what it was, but I had to have it. So I bought it, and I came home and I started thinking, I think I've got some pictures that my mom took. My mom was, I laugh. My memory of my mother is a brownie camera in front of her face going, stand still. And I said, I think mom's got some slides. She used to shoot slides. And I said, I think mom's got some slides. And I looked through the slides, and I found a picture of me with my pedal car, and it was that pedal car. And I didn't remember that. I didn't remember that it was a 48. Now, we had the station wagon version. What I bought was the fire truck. They made the car, the fire truck, and the station wagon. And I would have gotten it when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. Now that would have been 1954. And those of you that are listening are doing the math right now and going, now, wait a minute, if it was a 48, well, we were poor folks and it was passed down, and it was my cousin's car that he had. And he was of that age that he would have had it new in 1948, 49. And then my dad got it from my uncle and gave it to me. And it was then my car, the station wagon. I was able to find a very beautiful example of that 48 station wagon. That's one of my prize pieces too. But pedal cars are fun. You can customize them. You remember, cruising down the sidewalk and playing soapbox, or playing derby crashing with them, and doing that sort of thing. And you can customize them when you were a kid. Probably the other thing about pedal cars is, unlike full-size cars, and I know that some folks have the wherewithal to collect a whole bunch of full-size cars, but you can get a whole lot of pedal cars in a smaller space. You can hang them from the ceiling and put them in, and guys would get them and put them in their rec room. Their wives would be okay with it because they could put their doll collection or their bear collection in them and do that. And we rode that pedal car wave. It was big for quite a while, and then it changed because they brought the reproductions in. And somebody's not going to buy a Murray Dipside Champion. Those pedal car people that are listening are going to know what I'm talking about. 51 through 55, Murray did what they called a Dipside Champ. A Dipside Champion, we used to get $500, $600, $700 for them. Well, they brought the reproductions in, and I got no problem with them. They're reproductions, but they picked the 51 Murray Champion as the very first one to bring over the sea, and that one tripped a lot of triggers for guys because it's what they remembered. And if you want a pedal car in your rec room, or man cave, as they say, we talked about, a reproduction is probably just as good for you if you just want to have one. If you're not an astute collector, the hobby has flipped so much and changed that the cars that have a value are the cars that are original paint and original hubcaps, the unrestored. The ones with patina. How about, is that in the Webster's Dictionary now, patina?
I'm sure it is. And
the derby stuff, you would think that AJ Foyt was in the soapbox derby, or Rick Mears if it was your era. And no, not necessarily the case. There was one or two that went on to some fame, limited fame from the derby, but it was just such Americana. If you know the story of Chevrolet was involved in it, and you went and got the wheels and the axle at the Chevy dealer, and it was $5 or something. And the marketing idea was, got dad in the showroom, Chevy, and now we're building the cars.
I think that you might be in a unique position to know more about the soapbox derby than most people. What is your favorite bit of history or your favorite story from the history of the soapbox derby?
Well, I'm going to give you a couple. All right. Okay. We can edit this down, or we're going to make this a mini series. Two things. One was that the derby started in Dayton in 1934 by a man named Myron Scott, and he was an ad salesman for the local newspaper. And he saw these kids playing with their hand-built soapbox cars. They put wheels on soap boxes and ran them down thing. And he thought, that's a pretty cool idea for an event. Maybe we'll organize an event and these kids can race their cars, and I can do a special section of the newspaper and sell ads. Well, that was pretty good salesman. And he did it in 34. By the way, I've got, which I consider one of the holy grails, I've got a program from 1934. That's a real hard piece to have from Dayton. And he promoted it, and it just took off. And in 1936, and I don't know if you're going to Google this, I might be wrong by a year, and it doesn't matter, but it moved from Dayton to Akron, and Chevrolet got involved. Fisher Body stamped the helmets. They were metal. God, they looked like metal soup bowls that they would use as helmets. I'm talking about ringing your bell if you got upside down on that. But it moved to Akron, and it really took off. And it was huge. It was big. And the a bit of trivia, the different regions would have their competition, and whoever won the district for that region, they would go to Akron. and the local newspaper would sponsor that car. So if you find a soapbox derby car, take notes, folks. If you find a soapbox derby car that has amateurish lettering, like Dad and Lad did Bob's steering gears with a brush on the side of it, and then underneath it, it says the Indianapolis Star in perfect lettering, that's an All-American car. That means that car went to Akron for the finals because it had the regular lettering, and then the newspaper always added. But anyway, where I was getting with a bit of trivia was Myron Scott had such a good relationship with Chevrolet that in the 40s after the war, he went to work for them. And Myron Scott is in the National Corvette Museum in Bowling Green. And you know why? He went to work for them and he suggested the name Corvette for the Corvette sports car. And that's why he's in the museum. He's in the Hall of Fame down in Bowling Green. And he was the man that, and Corvette, if you look it up, the definition, it was a British fighting ship from the war. It was known for its agility and its speed. And he said, let's call it a Corvette. Huh. Hey, there you go. You just win the trivia contest. And the other story, if we've still got time, the other story is I had a good connection at the Soapbox Derby headquarters in Akron because I'm pretty close there. And I had a guy that had some things and people were donating some things and they were selling some things. And I went one day and he said, hey, I got a couple of flags that the guys carried in the parade at the All-American. Each year on Thursday, the winners of the regionals would march. They had all kinds of activities during the week, but they would march in a parade on Thursday. And each of the regional winners would carry the flag from the city that their regional headquarters was. Mm-hmm. And this was from 1962, I believe, 1962. And it was the 25th anniversary. And he held this flag up and it said Lincoln, Nebraska. And I said, Lincoln, Nebraska. And he goes, yeah. He said, this fellow won the All-American that year. I go, and my ears were smoking, right? I knew Speedy Bill at the time and knew the collectibles and the whole thing. And so I said, gosh, I need to buy that. It's Lincoln, Nebraska. It's Soapbox Derby. And they won the championship that year. And so I bought it. And it's neither here nor there what I paid for it. I could afford it, I guess. I bought it. And my thought was, I'm always a merchant. I said, Bill's going to buy this from me and he'll buy it and put it in his museum. And I saw him at Hershey that year. I got it in the summer. I saw him at Hershey and I told him about it. And you knew Bill, ultimate horse trader. I told him about all this and he goes, and he looked away and he went, that sounds interesting. Yeah, why don't you send me a picture of that train? That's all he did. Was, yeah, he didn't go, oh, no kidding, golly sake. He's just like, yeah, why don't you send me a picture of that? So I forgot. I didn't do it for some reason. I was busy with the road tour. So I saw him again at SEMA. And he goes, Dixie, hey, when there's something you had that you were going to send me a picture of or something? I go, yeah, I forgot, Bill, I'm sorry. So it was another Frank Capra moment. It was snowing and it was before Christmas. And I thought about it and I took that flag and I folded it up and I put it in a box and I said, Merry Christmas, Bill. I didn't need the $400 I was going to get for it, or whatever it was. I said, Merry Christmas. And I sent it to him. And I didn't hear from him until the next spring. And Bill was a busy guy. It wasn't like he was blowing me off. He was a busy guy. But maybe this was his style. I went through the museum that year in the spring and my name's on that flag. And it says from the collection of, and you can go up and look at it, Joe. It says from the collection of Jerry Dixie. And that was like so much better than whatever little amount of money that I would get for it. It was just like, you look around and there's not a lot of names on that stuff. And I know people donate stuff, but that to me was just Bill thanking me over and over forever.
Right.
That was cool.
I wanted to ask you about long hair Jerry in the 60s riding his chopper and going to Woodstock, but that doesn't really fit.
Well, let me tell you one that you haven't heard. Long hair Jerry, by the way, drove a 63 Ford Falcon to Woodstock. with his buddies, and we wouldn't have gotten in had it not been for somebody that figured out a way that we could get in the back way. And that's another story for another time. But one that you don't know is long-haired Jerry stood at the rim of the Snake River Canyon and saw Evel Knievel put the rocket in the drink.
Oh,
I was
whoa.
standing right there. If you want to go to internal combustion, we can keep it at that level rather than music. Yeah. The word on the street in 1974 was, and I had a motorcycle shop at the time. The word on the street was that Evel Knievel was going to spend $1 million and throw a party at the Snake River Canyon when he rides his, what we thought was going to be his XR 750 across the canyon. What were we thinking, right? But you got there and he was going to try to take a rocket across. That's what it was. It was a rocket ship. It wasn't a motorcycle. It had two wheels, but it had a jet engine on it. So I went out there and I could fill a whole nother podcast with stories of Evel Knievel's party at the Snake River Canyon. But to wrap things up, when you talk about Woodstock and you talk about Evel Knievel that I went to, and my wife and I and our friends, we traveled around a lot. We were hippies, kind of. And got to travel. And I get a kick out of the people on the road tour. Then they'd go, wow, what a life, driving hot rods all over the country and going to street rod events. What a wild life. And I look at them and go, man, you should have seen me in the day. This is retirement for me. So anyway, that'll kind of bring it full circle. But yeah, I've been very, very fortunate. I have been able to make a living, a decent living, doing the things that I enjoy. And, was it Mark Twain said that you'll never work a day in your life if you enjoy what you do. So, and I think, Joe, you got it too. I'll throw it back to you. You've got a pretty good deal. I see your hands in those advertisements every once in a while for Speedway. So
I too have a pretty good gig.
Yeah, that's fine. We're lucky. I appreciate that every day. About the fact that I'm able to make a living and do what I like. And I feel sorry for people. And hey, there's a lot of people that have to do it, but I feel sorry for people that get up every morning and have to go to a job they hate.
Yeah.
It's just not good.
Thanks to Jerry Dixey for being our guest today. And thanks to all of you for listening to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast. To see photos and watch video we referenced in today's episode, visit the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com. Email the podcast at podcast@speedwaymotors.com, and if you like what you heard, tell a friend where to find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.